Welcome to Native Calgarian and Mossy for listening. I'm your host, Michelle Robinson, speaking to you in Mohkinstsis in the Blackfoot Confederacy, home of the Nitsitapi, Sutina Dene, and the Yiharhi Nakota. I talk about history, current news, unheard news, book clubs, with special guests to give local or national issues a voice through an urban Satu Dene lens. My life's work will be to honor the voices of my ancestors and next generation with humor, love, and truth. Reconciliation is work, not performance. May we honor all Indigenous voices with that courage. Today is September 29th, 2025. Welcome to Native Calgarian. If you enjoy listening to Indigenous content by this Satu Dene woman, my Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for already showing your support. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or your questions. Also, giving a review helps whatever medium you're listening from. I also have a YouTube channel. You can go and subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And always remember to share the things you learned to your network. Oki, nagana go, meko che chestakom aki, or nara dago dekots nagotiene siku saradi. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use they, them pronouns. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake Tribe in Treaty 11 in Delany. I'm native to Turtle Island, and my Dene Nation is uninvited to this area of Clincho Tine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning Many Big Dog Town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary or in Blackfoot, Mohkinstsis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name that has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. Acknowledging proximity to whiteness is important because the point of colonialism and racism has everything to do with that. And if you don't acknowledge your advancement because of proximity to whiteness in colonial spaces, then you are not being fully honest about unpacking colonialism and racism. My great late grandfather is Milo B. Well from Delany. My late granny, Alice, is also with him now. And actually, I'm pretty sure they're with my auntie right now, who's about to pass. My mother and I are Northern Slavey Dene, or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act and Post status card by the Canadian government says Yellow Knives Dene. Through my father, I am the daughter of Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution, while having a Canadian Indian Act and Post status card. That's a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous Two-Spirit, or the Indigenous 2S LGBTQ community, and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socio-economic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. I am not an elder, nor am I a social worker, or do I speak on behalf of all Indigenous peoples. But I share my journey as a Dene mom, navigating this ableist, colonial, misogynistic, racist world in 2025. Land Back is a movement that could save the planet from climate change created by colonialism, but it would be a part of a treaty partnership, meaningful reconciliation, honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. As a former drafter, I'd love to teach you more, but you have to go to nativecalgarian.com for more. I think of all of this today, and I hope we honor the many Indigenous lives lost for this British Westminster system named Canada. I hope you all see your role in the importance of stopping harm, and as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation, and as a treaty partner. Now, today, I have a friend of mine that I'm lucky enough to call a friend, and I'm going to allow her to introduce herself in her way.
Thank you so much, Michelle, Red Thunder Woman. I'm Melanie Daniels. That's how I'm known on my birth certificate, which was issued by the province of Alberta, because I too was born in Calgary in Treaty 7 territory. But the ancestors know me as Notakuyotin, and that is Old Lady Wind in Cree. And I work, play, and live within Treaty 6 territory, which is the traditional territories of the Cree, the Dene, the Blackfoot, the Saulteaux. I think I'm missing somebody, but as well as the homelands as the Métis. And I've been in this area for going on over a decade now, working in a in a role where I fight hard for Mother Earth. And I too believe that when we strive for land back and upholding Indigenous rights, we will find the solutions to climate change, loss of biodiversity, and cumulative effects, because all of those things are happening to all of us, no matter what our indigeneity or non-indigeneity is.
Agreed.
Anyway, so thank you
Yes.
very much, Michelle, for having me.
I'm honored to have you, Melanie. And I'm just going to say, as she is the niece of Harry Daniels, for
Oh,
folks who
yes.
know about Harry Daniels, and I think it's important to acknowledge the, institutional knowledge that she has, not just on the environment, but also in Métis world, and that this is one of those people that I kind of always say, is that a whitewash Métis or is it a Métis? And you're not a whitewashed one. You are one who legitimately cares about, the environment, our traditions, honoring treaties, as well as colonial Westminster procedures and policies and working within those systems in order to advance, you know, wildlife, the Mother Earth, everything that we need to do together. Because and that's the irony about Canada and the Westminster system, and they don't understand is that we all win if we work together and hear the Indigenous point of view and even implement the Indigenous point of view, then we all win.
100%.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
I love hearing you. We connected on TikTok as well, and you're killing it on TikTok. And I try to amplify your messages because I think a lot of people are always looking for that Indigenous knowledge. So, and you share it freely just while walking around, and I love that about you. So, I appreciate you coming on here. Now, I got an email out of the blue, a news release about a lawsuit and Indian oil and gas. I want your name was on there. And I immediately texted you, like, well, you gonna come on the podcast and tell me about this or what?
And
So,
here I am.
and here you are. So thank you
Mhm.
for making the time. And so let's talk about Indian oil and gas. Let's talk about why there's a lawsuit and let's get into that.
Yeah. Okay. And just for clarity, I am of Métis ancestry, but I also have that status card now too. So I retained or gathered my status because I wanted to honor my great grandmother who was told that she couldn't be who she was because of who she married. So I know that there might be some concept that you can't walk in both worlds as Métis and First Nation, but I'm giving it a go.
Yeah, no, I think it's one of the things that upset me the most when we talk about Indigenous identity. Out here on the prairies, like Métis and Indigenous, like First Nations together are together. And
Yeah.
up where I'm from in Yellowknife, basically Métis is it's they just outright say anyone of Dene descent. So like I knew for my daughter, no matter what, she was going to be considered a Yellowknife Métis at the minimum.
Right.
But for the same reason, I went through the process and we got her status because it's important to me that we honor who we are, where we come from. But I also I did it with consent because with all the love to my parents, I didn't know what I was signing up to be an Indian. I didn't know that meant the possibility of every one of my children being stolen from me. I didn't know that meant I would be murdered in a hospital because I'm Native and they have hate against Natives. I didn't know that meant that if I die, I will get zero justice from this system. So I was very careful to explain this to her before I got her status. And Murray Sinclair was like, "You just shut." He said it nicer. You get her status. And I was like, I think about my auntie who's passing right now in Edmonton and how hard she worked for me to get my status and my mom to retain hers back in 1986. So, I need to honor that too. And I think it's really important we say it because I think a lot of Canadians don't understand status at all. They don't
I know.
understand how conflicted folks like yourself are who have, lineage from Red River as well as status. And I think the new generation, they're so adorable with their don't say the word half breed. I'm like, oh, babykins, is that an offensive word to you?
I was raised a half breed. I
I
was told I was
know.
half breed my whole life.
it's us older generation, like, taking that language and trying to explain it to the youth, like, this is what you don't understand. And I thought Maria Campbell explained it really well in her book, and all these kids are reading it, but
Yeah.
it's like, okay, but you don't see every settlement of Canada had an English side and a French side, and then the half-breed side or the Métis side. Like, you don't see that, but yet it's written right in the book.
Yeah.
So, like, we have to honor where we come from. And when I got accused of being a pretend Indian, it was actually this young Métis who does this wonderful research. He actually found out my family also had script at one point in time. So, and
Yeah.
we didn't know that. The entire family had no idea. So, it's interesting when these things come up, how government policies have negatively impacted us. And but because they're so good at keeping records, we get to find out.
Exactly. I say this all the time too. So good. They were so proud of their work because they created so much evidence for us.
A hundred
Anyways.
percent. So
Yeah. All right. So back to IOGC. So I am a member of the class action lawsuit against Indian Oil and Gas Canada. We're claiming workplace racism and discrimination. And there are several of us, Indigenous employees, former and maybe one current, I'm not exactly sure on that, but who've all had some level of discrimination imposed on us in that organization. Mine specifically comes from, first off, coming to the organization as a biologist. I am a professional biologist now. I did not have my professional designation at the time, but I had 5 years experience already coming from Indian and Northern Affairs Canada, now Indigenous Services, where I played a role as an environmental protection officer, environmental compliance officer, and worked my way into environmental policy officer. So where I actually drafted policy for the Alberta region of Indian and Northern Affairs at the time. So this was in the late 90s, early 2000s. And due to some workplace issues and some personal matters, it was time for me to leave INAC. And so I became aware of a position at IOGC for an environment and surface analyst. And I thought this would be a great opportunity for me to learn more about oil and gas, the regulatory process, use my knowledge working through, at the time, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, now the Impact Assessment Act, as well as, environmental protection and land management on reserve that I'd gained in the previous 5 years working at INAC. So I come to the organization very happy and keen to work in this new role. And I was actually being kind of talent managed for a potential uh, advancement to management role. However, there were a couple of occasions where I was not supportive of approving well sites on two different First Nations. And these were two different occasions. So my job was to review the applications for new well sites, new access roads, new pipelines, and associated facilities and works. So there were two separate occasions where the siting of these well sites were not environmentally sound and may also result in impacts to cultural sites and water resources and things like that. So I did not want to approve these well sites
Mhm.
and declined them. And then I was, of course, the chief and councils of these First Nations were not happy that they were denied these applications and went directly to the CEO, where the CEO directed me to approve them. So this went against my integrity, my values, my professionalism, and my idealism when it comes to protecting land. On First Nations land, we have fixed land bases and growing populations. And when we isolate areas because of contamination or potential impacts to water, cultural sites, wildlife, and land in general, that's can be a future problem for First Nations. Look where we're at right now with orphan wells and things. They're not just in Alberta, they're on reserve lands too.
Yep.
So that, undermining my professional opinion started to cause me harm. And the personal reason why I left INAC was because I was with my late spouse at the time. We were common law spouse. participating in addiction. So I'd left there to, also get away from that and try to, get myself back into order. Well, some of this workplace crap,
Yeah.
and starting from that, being directed to approve projects that I didn't think were environmentally sound or were in the best interest of the First Nation for their
Mm-hmm.
long term.
Yep.
That's really started to trigger me again. And then, I fell into addictions once again. I, you know, I was struggling for a little bit and then realized that this was really having an impact in my life. And I went to the Human Resources Department at IOGC to let them know that I was struggling. And they said to me right away, "Thank goodness you came in because your manager has been working with us trying to fire you." So instead of reaching out to support me or find any way, like even talk to me about what my issues are, offer me support and, in any way, that was the approach he took. And I guess I'm not sure why HR didn't reach out to me directly, but once I did reach out to them, they were very grateful and it felt to me like they weren't able to for some reason, but I'm not clear as to why, which is part of the problem with that we're having with IOGC. So they did pay for me to go into treatment. I went to treatment, but not once during that time did I hear from them, receive any guidance or feedback on how to work with them to return to work in a good way, to feel comfortable about returning to work. So I remember one time calling and talking to a previous colleague who advised me at the time that my manager was actually telling third parties, like
Oh,
oil and gas reps, that I'm nothing but a drug addict.
I'm so
So
sorry. Oh my God.
and this caused me harm. Like I'm still healing, right? Like I was still in treatment. I called to see what was going on and what my next steps were and stuff. And this was the advice or what I'd heard. And I was like, now I don't, I'm embarrassed and ashamed, and I didn't feel comfortable to go back. So I looked for
Understandable.
another opportunity at INAC. Maybe I could return there, but they put barriers in front of me that limited my ability to participate in interviews because there was one open position that I was qualified for. So I decided to quit.
Sure.
And because I didn't feel good about myself for going back there and
Sure.
but in the meantime, my other colleagues and the ones that are also party to this class action were experiencing so much discrimination within their jobs and their day-to-day life and basically harassment from management. To the point where a few of that colleagues, there were three women specifically, that were getting a new manager. And the manager or the direct supervisor of the new manager had invited these individuals to come for a meeting to meet their new manager. And this was an off-site meeting where they proceeded to inform the three Indigenous women that would be reporting to this new manager that the new manager had been convicted of sexual assault in the past. Now, this puts Indigenous women in a really bad place because unfortunately, many of us, and I have, we've experienced sexual assault. And so this can be triggering and traumatizing, and then you make maybe feel uneasy. There's a power dynamic being having to report to somebody that you have now knowledge about this criminal activity. And this seems to be a pattern. IOGC currently has the CEO is ex-chief of Onion Lake Cree Nation, Wallace Fox, who I understand has pled guilty to domestic violence charges.
Mm,
So again, now bringing into the workplace another individual who has committed crimes and violent crimes against Indigenous women. So
yeah, I
it's
know.
really alarming, actually. And that these women, like I left, I saw the writing on the wall, and I'm grateful in some ways that I did because I've had a wonderful career,
Sure.
still have a wonderful career, and I've done a lot of great things. I do believe that I could have done a lot of great things for First Nations as well as Canada had I stayed as a public servant.
Yep.
However, that wasn't in the cards for me, I guess. But these ladies stayed until retirement. And
Mm,
they are amazing women who are intelligent, professional, and they were. harmed in so many ways, overlooked for advancement, not given the opportunities to share, to also provide their professional opinion, constantly looked down upon and dismissed. And then, so because of this toxic workplace, they put the efforts in to write out a long list of grievances to the ex-CEO, who was then Strader Crowfoot. Like all of this is public information. So,
Yep.
um, and they were responded to with, we're going to look into these things, or can you whittle it down? This is too much for us to take on. And, they're not at one time, I don't recall ever learning what my rights were as an employee there, because IOGC staff are not party to the union like other federal public servants, because they can't, IOGC can't compete with the private sector for pay grade, for salaries. If you have to comply with the public service pay scale systems, right? So they're outside of the union. So we had no recourse. We had no real knowledge on how to deal with these issues. And this caused, because of this lack of serious intent to address the issues, staff struggled to come to work on a regular basis or come back to work and with good commitment. Like, you don't feel good about your job when you don't
No.
feel like you're being supported. And we've heard, now I can't confirm this, but we have heard from current employees that many of the current Indigenous staff at IOGC are on stress leave. And this is problematic. Like, back to that whole um, listing of the issues. Basically, the CEO was gaslighting the IOGC staff by saying we won't worry about those things. We'll think about the future, was one of his responses to them. So,
Ugh.
like, rather, brushing them off. Okay, those things happen. Let's make it better tomorrow. But like, and this is when he wanted the 30 items to be whittled down to 9.
That's disgusting. No
Yeah.
wonder we're at a lawsuit moment here. Um, I seem to recall the Mannings were involved with oil and gas. Back to the reason why there's no freaking like proper union as well. I was just trying to look it up because I remember so when my background is in geomatics. And so I was thinking that, if I have this background, maybe I should go to oil and gas. And I remember, it being basically conservative run. And I was thinking, well, this is not a place for me then. And then I heard, obviously, over the course of many years, the amount of discrimination that happens in that company, and I was like, well, I don't ever want to work there. So it like from my point of view, I just think it's a lie why there's not a union there first and foremost, and because like it's even still called Indian for God's sakes.
It's the legislation, right?
I
Because there's the
know,
Indian Oil and Gas Act.
right? I know. It's incredible. It's incredible to me. Um, the conversation that even happens on the development of Indian oil and gas, let alone who's running it, let alone the reason why there's not more federal oversight, even though it's exactly federal jurisdiction. Anyway, I don't mean to, take away, but my point is really just
Absolutely.
to add to how toxic the environment really is and how that has been a rumor in my entire life as well, that it's a toxic place to be. And so I knew I wouldn't be helping my people by being there. That's why I chose to not even put my name in there. Um,
Thank
and
you for saying that, because
yeah,
this is something I've been thinking about too. And because of being forced to make a different recommendation on those two well sites that I was referring to, it makes me think about what level of service are we as employees at Indian Oil and Gas Canada providing to the First Nations in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Northeast BC, and some in Ontario that have oil and gas. There's only 3 at the time, anyways. Maybe there's 4 now, but I think there still only might be 3. So take it as that. But environment and surface analysts for all of that whole entire region. Northeast BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and parts of Ontario. We're supposed to oversee all of those First Nations that have oil and gas in Canada.
and
And
that's
so we're, and then to put no offense to ex-Chief Fox. Like he did great things for his nation. He is very well informed when it comes to oil and gas because Onion Lake does have a lot of oil and gas activity on their reserve. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he should be leading a regulator. But it's just my opinion right now because I haven't worked with him directly. So it just makes me wonder how they choose the people. Also, what we were seeing is these folks that are guilty of harassment,
Mm,
they get promoted. They're advanced and
I
moved
know.
elsewhere. Like one of the individuals that I left Indian Affairs for ISK Indigenous Services now, then Indian Affairs. Um, I left IOGC because of conflict with this individual. Well, there ended up being so much conflict at INAC that he got eventually moved to IOGC, where he actually perpetuated the same behavior. And there are many who struggled with this individual and his management style, or lack thereof, maybe. So, what's happened to him now is he's now a senior level public servant in another department in the Atlantic region. And so it just demonstrates that harassers get promoted.
Yeah, 100%. I
And
know.
then, and us that raise the flag and say, this is happening to me, we get silenced. Or, then we're the troublemakers. And we're the ones talked about.
Yeah,
Anyways,
100%.
and our
No.
struggle now is Canada is saying that we had all these processes already in place. We could go through the other processes to grieve or to pursue resolution with issues. Those were never made clear to us. And when they were, like, because I'd left, so there are other employees that went through a lot of these processes. They never worked out. There wasn't follow up. They weren't complied with properly, so they didn't meet deadlines and timelines and like there's a huge systemic failure for an organization that's actually because Indian Oil and Gas Canada is an agency of Indigenous Services Canada, much like the Canada Energy Regulator is an agency of Natural Resources Canada.
Mhm.
Now, I remember in the late 90s and early 2000s when it was a goal of both of these organizations to recruit and retain and advance Indigenous people. Well, they kind of recruited. They didn't do so great at retaining and advancement. I have yet to see it happen. This is 28 years. I started my career in 1997 with that department. And there's still not an Indigenous region or director general. There are some senior levels that are happening now more and more, but I can't imagine how easy it is to be Indigenous and have to report to the minister or, walk in that colonial line.
Yeah, no kidding. I remember when the Black public servant employees did a class action because for this exact same reason that, they would train people and then that would become their supervisor eventually. And so they did have to sue in order to try to talk about the issues. And I remember it was our February book club. We actually went through some of the recommendations. And because of the changes in government, a lot of that stuff was being put on hold. So even for me, like I need to do that follow up, and it's already almost October, and I haven't done that follow up now that we have this new government and we're moving forward. Because at the end of the day, with those recommendations, the reason why I care and I'm so invested is because I know damn well it goes exactly for Indigenous people, and then the ones that are higher up almost always are pretend Indians. They're actually not indigenous at all, have no indigeneity at all. So for me, this is a massive like failure of the system, discrimination against indigenous people, black people as well. I don't want to exclude them. And so to me, I'm really proud of you and everyone who's doing this lawsuit because at the end of the day, we have been discriminated against. And in fact, the exploitation of our lands, because that's what we're talking about too. Like there hasn't been proper profit sharing. And so I've always kind of looked at Indian oil and gas with that lens of like, you really should be this and you're not, you're way over here doing this. And then not to mention the harm they're causing their actual employees, the lands, and, promoting really problematic people within it. Right. So, like, you're just seeing this like
Mhm.
cesspool here when it should be over here,
Absolutely.
you know, getting these resources that go to all 634 nations. And like we really should be having conversations of, like, we have the Métis settlements, we have a lot of Métis folks that deserve to have equity, in my opinion, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that. And there's none, like there's nothing, like that isn't even a conversation we're having at all. So anyway, I've overthought this way too much, and I don't
No,
mean to distract.
it's truly all connected. Like just a little bit further to what you said, like IOGC has implemented the Alberta Energy Regulator processes.
The worst in the
They do have to
country.
comply, right? They have to, well, to be fair, Saskatchewan has no regulatory process. So basically,
Saskatchewan's
the
worse.
Wild
Okay.
West out
They
there.
can win.
But but like why would they have to comply with the Impact Assessment Act? So that's why the IODC triggers review. But to employ a system that isn't working off reserve on reserve is crazy to me.
Right.
Anyway, so um yeah, we continue to just face all of this, and I'm sure it's still happening, which is unfortunate. And the fact that Canada is pushing back so hard so that we don't get certified to me speaks volumes because I think they realize. And I'm really concerned about, again, not just us as employees and former employees, but the service level or level provisions that are given to First Nations now. Like what's happening?
Hmm.
When you go to work and you're not feeling good about your job, you don't feel secure or safe enough to raise issues and concerns,
Yeah.
we might be failing the client. And the client in this case is First Nations.
Hmm. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
No, what, I guess connected you to the other folks to decide to do this? That's probably a good question I should ask you.
So they reached out to me because they recalled, like, they were there when I worked there.
Hmm.
These ladies have been there over 20 years, 30 years, I think, a couple of them. So
Wow.
they knew my circumstances, they knew what happened, and so they found me and reached out to me to see if I'd be interested in joining with them. So absolutely, I was like, I'm all over this because we need to create a better workspace for everybody there. Like, you know, like
Yes.
not everybody can be happy when they see racism. I think it serves some folks. Some folks were just like, right on, I don't have to compete with them anymore or
Sure.
whatever. And they also took advantage of the power dynamics. And I
Yeah.
would argue mostly non-Indigenous Caucasian males. They preferred this. And there was also, there was there were times like where staff was told, well, if you don't like it here, you can look for other jobs. Instead of like, let's find some resolution.
Yeah, let's solve some problems here. No, no, no,
Yeah.
no. Let's go straight there.
Yeah. So
But
it's
to be
just,
fair, and I will say this, in Alberta, especially in the 90s and 2000s, like that's just been the attitude. Like I would only say, only since COVID has been the first time that there's not jobs plentifully available, which has been really weird for my husband and I. But to be fair, that's like even for me when I had experienced discrimination, I was just like, well, I'm obviously not respected here. So I went and looked for another job, got another job, and immediately started working somewhere else because for this reason, like when you're being disrespected, and before there were plentiful jobs, but it's different for Indian oil and gas because that is a very specific place to be. And it is
100%.
for them to say that shows the amount of power dynamic they had as colonial powers to say that. And I think that that's part of the crux of this lawsuit is that they don't even realize how racist they are, and they don't
Ye-
even know.
It's so interesting the way you say this too, because one of the other claimants was telling me. So the process she went through was they were going to be receiving some correspondence back to her. She was the claimant, and the individual that was the accused, I guess, in this one circumstance of workplace harassment. So when the accused received his letter, she received her letter at the same time. The CEO never approached her to see if she's okay or wants to talk about anything, but he did approach the one that was accused and took him for lunch to soften the blow.
What a dick.
Right?
What a dick.
So,
Yeah.
but this is an Indigenous, a First Nation CEO with a non-Indigenous man who was the accused,
Yeah, they both have penises, though. That's the thing. Patriarchy is
right?
patriarchy. Fuck those guys.
Absolutely. But I also feel like those CEO, like to be at that level, maybe, and this is just me thinking about it, right?
Sure.
Maybe you feel that power dynamic. So now you want to kind of kiss the butts of the higher ups so that you stay in your high level executive position, or
Mm-hmm.
you feel maybe not disempowered yourself because like I have seen what kind of pressure that ministers, the prime minister can apply on regions. And
Sure.
like, you get a minister who's in a tizzy about something, and all of a sudden everybody's got to react within the department. Oh my God, the minister wants something, right? So maybe that's happening too in some ways, but then again, that's a failure of the system.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole goal of trying to recruit, retain, and advance Indigenous people within that organization
Yeah.
and all organizations in the government of Canada. Like, I work with several departments. And I can tell you that Indigenous Services Canada and Indian Oil and Gas by default are the worst at anything when it comes to reconciliation.
Yes.
Department of Fisheries and Oceans, the Impact Assessment Agency through Environment and Climate Change Canada, NRCan, Natural Resources Canada, they're all doing far better. They're leaps and bounds ahead when it comes to trying to reconcile with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. But ISK is like dragging back there, left in the dust. I was like, what is going on? They should be leading the way.
They should be. I know. It's wild to me. It is wild. And I'm really glad you came on to talk about like how this should be working because well, one, I don't get to talk about oil and gas too much with too many people in general because we just have different worlds that we see it through. And
That's
even though
right.
I worked in, Canadian private industry, I couldn't talk about Indigenous issues at work. And in fact, the more I had to unpack it after having my baby, like I know I could never go back there now, ever. It's just not in my cards. It's when I see the guidelines for energy companies specifically for the national inquiries calls to justice and knowing there's no implementing this in this field, that field, this company, no way. It's not even on the radar. I just I don't know how to stop this machine and knowing actually downtown Calgary specifically is not just hurting Alberta, not just hurting Canada, but hurting
Yeah.
internationally. Like, Brandy Morin is on the front lines right now of a mining company from Canada that's hurting that region too. And so I wish I do feel helpless in a lot of ways, but at least these types of lawsuits give me a little bit of hope that there's going to have to be a little bit of change in this industry because right now it's just rape and pillage and exploit and money. That's it. And
Absolutely.
I mean in every fashion, not just of the land. I mean the employees, like
Yeah.
drugs, everything. Like it. I know lots of companies that have long-standing rooms in hotels, apartments downtown here in Calgary, and human trafficking is a part of this issue. And there's no mechanism and no care to change this. Like, this isn't a conversation the Calgary police want to have with me, that's for damn sure. There's so much to unpack in these conversations, and this is just one little sliver of hope.
Just-
Yeah, yeah, and all
And
rebellions need hope.
I love that you see all of that interconnectedness of all of this, right?
Yeah,
Because a lot of us, I think the attitude in IOGC was that we're fortunate we got these good jobs. We should be, grateful
Yeah.
because IOGC is a high payer compared to the rest because you can't attract people in oil and gas if you don't have good salaries. But I really appreciate that you see all of that interconnection because it's truly the way it is. And it doesn't serve Canada though, because Canada likes to deal everything in the silos.
Yes.
And this.
Even in geomatics. So like the survey companies that I was a part of, we mainly Alberta land surveyors, but also a couple of Saskatchewan ones, and then the Canadian land surveyor was the only one that could deal with reserve
On
lands.
reserve, yeah.
Yeah. So even within the survey industry, it was so siloed, right, of who could work and be like in my case, a drafter for who. So I worked in Saskatchewan a little bit, like here in Calgary, I did a lot of the drafting. Then I was doing drafting in Alberta. And then when I moved to this other company, very rarely did I get to do any Indian reserves. And I tried to ask questions to the Canadian land surveyor. And you know who he was? He was a land surveyor from South Africa, and he came to Canada because he said, "You don't understand how dangerous it was getting there," with his British accent. Because people would just shoot you in the face. And like, I'm like, I kind of knew you mean, people wanted their land back.
Yeah, imagine that. Stay tuned,
Yeah,
buddy. No.
I know. Unfortunately, he has long left this world and such, but
Oh,
I always found it interesting how like people did not want to have any kind of real conversation about
enough so
colonialism.
that you would go around the world away from it,
Right? Right?
right?
Like just run away
Wow.
from it. And that's why like I kind of get irritated, like it's like an itch when I see all these Albertan settler folks go, "Oh my God, I hate it here. I'm gonna move to BC. I'm gonna move somewhere else." And I'm like, "You bitch, you stole all of our shit and now you're leaving us to clean up your mess."
Absolutely. That's exactly what's going to happen. But
Yeah.
anyways,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think that's pretty much all of it. Like there's little stories to tell and other versions and other folks that have their own to add to this, but that's it in a nutshell. It's just about the toxicity of the workplace, the
Yeah.
silencing of the Indigenous voices around that table, the lack of advancement, the harassment, discrimination, which leads to fear. Once
Yes.
you're in that situation, now you're scared to raise your voice or raise concerns. And I think that's what they were probably hoping for.
Yeah.
But little did they know us women, right? We're
Right?
strong. And
Well,
like what you were saying about the court cases, like I think it's really important too for future employees. To me, that's the big goal, right? Is that future employees have a good, safe place to come to work where they can be themselves, share their concerns openly, and do the best job they can for the First Nations that they serve. The
yes.
sad thing is how long everything takes for us to sort it out in the court systems.
I
And
know.
meanwhile, we don't know what that workplace is like. Like I said, we've heard that there's Indigenous staff currently on stress leave and things like that. So hopefully we can find some resolution to this matter sooner than later, and that there will be some direction coming down from the Prime Minister and the Minister to start addressing the systemic issues. Like there was a report done in 2022, 78 findings. It was found that this is a discriminatory place to work. We have the report. It's been redacted greatly because it was released and then we filed our case and then they pulled it back. So what does that tell you? But nothing there,
Stinkers.
right? It doesn't seem that anything in that report has been implemented yet.
Mm-mm.
So just get to work, IGC, and make it a better workplace. You have the solution. There's professionals that have done the work to assess the job site, to give some recommendations on how to make improvements. Instead, they're fighting it and and
Okay,
and dragging their feet.
tomorrow is September 30th. Call to Action 57 is anti-racism training and Indigenous education for all public servants. So every single person who worked at Indian Oil and Gas should have had by now 10 years under their belt of anti racism training and Indigenous education but they don't, and it's not implemented because zero Canadians seem to care about it whatsoever. And so, like,
I know.
this is bare minimum stuff, let alone the national inquiry, and that should be exactly implemented through Indian oil and gas.
Yeah. And now Canada's going to use this excuse of, and I get it. We are in a very geopolitical, topsy-turvy world, right? Where we don't know what's going on exactly due to our neighbors to the south and climate change and layers of crap that government officials and decision makers and policymakers have to deal with. But that's the job you sign up for as a politician. And we got to get it together here and make it a better place for everybody and address some of these things and do the work. Do that work that you're always, reminding everybody so eloquently. And I love how well you know all of this stuff, and that you can just reference call to action 57. My big one is 92, right? That's
Yep. No, and
I'm
you're
always
totally
reminding
right.
everybody
And
about 92.
honestly, and autism has its advantages. I don't care what
Right?
anybody says.
I'm sure, right? You're brilliant.
Oh,
So
just kidding. But that
hopefully,
bigger
though, this
picture,
will be the outcome.
I want you and everyone on this side to know the reason why I'm so happy and passionate that you're doing this, because like I've seen it from the inside for so long, how bad this industry is to Indigenous people. And my daughter's about to go to SAIT and enter the workforce. And I know you're
Hmm.
all doing this for the next generation. So I thank you on behalf of that next generation for doing this now so that the next group, the next cohorts, hopefully have it a little better and their lawsuit has less things to have to implement.
Absolutely. That's it. Exactly. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Michelle, for
Oh,
acknowledging that.
thank you, Melanie. Thank you for all you're doing. And you're welcome back anytime to talk about this or
Yes.
whichever else you want to continue this conversation on.
Let's talk about Alberta oil and gas next time, my friend.
Excellent.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me and spending this time with me and shedding light on this situation. And let's all pray for a positive outcome so that, Canada can do better by Indigenous people and the future employees have a better workplace.
Oh, agreed. Thank you, Melanie. I appreciate you.
Kinanis come to now, my friend.
So grateful to have Melanie come and you all get to meet her. I think she's a beautiful human being inside and out. And with that, by the time you listen to this, we will have already had Orange Shirt Day. It's bigger than just an orange shirt, as I said in my last podcast. We will have done the John Wells March. And so I'm hoping folks will be following that family and pushing for some justice there. We are also still looking for Samuel Bird. I'm praying for him and his family. The Sisters in Spirit vigils will have happened on Saturday. So I'm hoping everybody's holding space in their hearts for the families of the missing and murdered, exploited Indigenous people across this country so that so-called Canada can exist. And I hope you see some of the conversation that Melanie and I had, how that directly relates to that topic as well. We have a very short window to sign for Forever Canadian petitions. I recently seen an MP and he refused to sign it on the spot. So I know a lot of people are making excuses for them as well as the sitting NDP MLAs, why it is that they shouldn't have to sign it. But at the end of the day, they should be freaking signing it. So municipal politics, just came from Elections Calgary. They didn't have couriered over yet their ballots, so they're hoping to get them this afternoon. So I'm hoping to get my vote in this afternoon. I was lucky enough to already sign up for my COVID and flu shots before I see my mom in her operations. So by the time you're hearing this, my mom should have gone in for an operation, and I should be in Edmonton by her side, waiting for her to get out of that operation. And then you will hear a lot of our banked podcasts with book clubs. So I do hope you consider joining us on, I want to say it's October 13th is our next one. where we have a Stephen Graham Jones novel that I am excited to read. I actually haven't even got started on it. I'm just trying to get ready for my mom's surgery. So, and I was able to get a couple of podcasts, including this one, in. So please share the information that you learned from this podcast, from the other podcasts, so that we can move forward. And then a special shout out for November's book club by Tony Rees. Arc of the Medicine Line, and that talks very specifically about the surveying of the Canada-US border. And considering the conversation we've had this year, holy, I hope you all join me for that. I want to say a massive thank you to the Reconciliation Action Group for volunteering, not just for September 30th, but also October 4th. All of the volunteering they do throughout the year. I wish more Canadians would get on board. I have a Google Doc that I have posted publicly a million times. It's in my link tree so that you can see some of the answers that the Calgary candidates running for a municipal election have answered towards me, and a Reconciliation Action Group has access to that in the hopes that more people will be out there and sharing it and getting involved in municipal politics. This term, it's really important you know the school trustee you're voting for, because there is an active campaign to get rid of books, sex ed, pronouns out of all things. Like it's just coming right down. We're getting massive amount of American influence into Alberta politics, and some Albertans are happy about it, and I just wish they'd move. But since they're not, it's important for you as a listener, as a voter, to know what it is you're voting for. And this is all across Alberta. So if you are listening to me in Grand Prairie, know that there is a concerted effort right now to infiltrate your school board, your municipality, to have these pro-American candidates at these tables. So know who you're voting for. And with that, I just say Masi Cho to my ancestors, to my family, of what strength and resilience actually look like through their example. My dad teaching me to be strong and blunt. My stepmom teaching me what a proud culture her Austrian family and roots are. To my husband, Darcy, big Buffalo Rock man, you have been on top of being the best editor and producer. You are my husband, childhood friend, father of our child, and my support, witnessing decades of racism, sexism, ableism, supporting my brother for 3 years to live in our basement, who, by the time this will air, unfortunately, he'll have left us onto greener and brighter pastures, which I'm happy for, and that he was never officially homeless. To our child, we are so blessed to have you. You are the reason why I try to be a better, stronger person. You give me daily accountability. We are so honored you chose us. I just hope that my entire family will be proud down the road listening to me discuss these issues. I want to honor the Blackfoot. The elders, the members have been so kind to me on my Red Road journey, despite me being on their land. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot. Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce it in Satu Dene. My humblest apologies to the elders, language keepers, as I learn proper pronunciation. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. I can't emphasize this enough. This has been completely funded by donors and myself. It's not sustainable. So if you can afford $1, I would appreciate it. If you can afford more, great. If you gave before, thank you. I just want you to all know how much I appreciated every, dollar. But if you value listening and watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or your questions. You can also go to nativecalgarian.com for more, and especially to sign up for the book club. I just want to say, I know I probably won't get a chance to talk again for at least a month. And my hope is that everybody stays safe and has a wonderful Halloween. It's one of my favorite holidays. So I hope that we can cross paths on that. Thank you so much, folks, for listening. And I hope you enjoy the book clubs coming up.